I only stopped at the spaceport diner because my ship's diagnostics were lying to me again, and because the coffee there tasted like regret filtered through hope. That was it. No destiny. No prophecy. Just a flickering engine warning and a caffeine addiction. If anyone had told me that 10 minutes later I'd be legally bound to an alien aristocrat, financially responsible for her bad decisions, and emotionally attached to a reptile that could probably eat my arm, I would have laughed and ordered a second cup. The place was busy in that uniquely interstellar way, too many species pretending not to look at each other. Traders hunched over tablets, pilots arguing with mechanics over comms, a pair of insected tourists taking photos of food they were absolutely not going to eat. Everyone minded their own business with professional discipline. Everyone except her. At first, I thought it was coincidence. You glance around a room, eyes meet, no big deal. Happens all the time. But then it happened again. And again. Not a quick look away either. Just steady, calm, unblinking attention, like she decided I was a math problem she intended to solve. She wasn't loud about it. Didn't wave. Didn't smile. Didn't do anything that screamed danger or flirtation. She just looked at me like she already knew something I didn't. Now I'm human. That's important context. Humans are bad at not responding to eye contact. We either assume threat, attraction, or awkward social obligation. Given that she wasn't holding a weapon and hadn't summoned security, my brain narrowed it down to option 2. Maybe 3. Also, yeah? She was stunning. Not in the exaggerated, Hollywood sense. More like gravity. The kind of presence that made the space around her feel intentional. The chatter nearby had dropped a notch, like people unconsciously giving her room. I noticed because I'm good at noticing when everyone else notices something and pretends they didn't. So I did what any human would do when stared at by someone beautiful in a public place. I bought her a coffee. I didn't overthink it. I didn't run simulations. I didn't ask myself what the cultural implications might be of offering a caffeinated beverage to a non-human aristocratic species I knew absolutely nothing about. I just stood up, walked to the counter, paid for 2 cups, and carried one over like this was a normal, everyday interaction that definitely wouldn't derail my entire life. The silence hit before I reached her table. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just a subtle thinning of noise. A dropped utensil. A cough that didn't get covered up. By the time I set the cup down across from her, you could have heard a vacuum seal pop. I smiled, because that's also what humans do when we're committed to a bad idea. Figured you might want one, I said, gesturing to the cup. On me. She looked at the coffee. Then back at me. Then she placed one elegant hand flat on the table, fingers splayed, and inclined her head by exactly the amount that suggested formality, not gratitude. I accept, she said. Her voice was calm. Warm. Resonant in a way that made my ears feel like they were being complimented. That should have been my first clue. Around us, several aliens abruptly stood up and left. One of them crossed themselves with what looked like 3 elbows. I laughed. No pressure. If you hate it, I'll pretend this never happened. She wrapped her fingers around the cup, lifted it, and took a sip. Her eyes never left mine. The tablet on my wrist vibrated. Once. Twice. Then it chimed cheerfully, like it had just won a prize. I glanced down. New status registered. Provisional guardianship, pending confirmation. I blinked. What's guardianship? I asked, mostly to myself. The diner erupted. Not screaming. Not panic. More like the sound of people who just witnessed a natural disaster that wasn't technically illegal but absolutely wasn't supposed to happen to them. A server hurried over, pale in a way their species didn't normally get. Sir, they said quietly, you should not have done that. I looked at the woman across from me. She was smiling now. Softly. Like this was all going exactly according to plan. I believe, she said, your species would call this a commitment. Okay, I said slowly. We need to rewind. Because I bought you a drink. That's it. That's the entire action. Yes, she replied. And by doing so, you acknowledged my selection. My tablet chimed again. Financial liability sinking. Dependence, 1 biological, 1 companion creature. A low, dangerous hiss came from beneath her table. I leaned to the side just in time to see a travel crate rattle as something inside it pressed against the reinforced bars. A scaled snout emerged, followed by a single glowing eye that fixed on me with predatory interest. That's not a dog, I said. She followed my gaze fondly. He is bonded to my household. He will now bond to you. The crate shook harder. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "The human accepted without counsel." I held up both hands. Look. This is clearly a misunderstanding. I'm just a pilot. I don't do guardianship. I don't even do plants. I forgot to water one once and it sued me. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. The contact was light, warm, steady. Do not fear, she said gently. You have already demonstrated the necessary qualities. Which are? I asked. Boldness, generosity, a willingness to approach what others avoid. My tablet finished syncing. Guardianship confirmed, temporary. Notice, debts, titles, and disputes now shared. I stared at the screen. Debts? She tilted her head. Substantial. Titles? Several. Disputes? Her smile sharpened, just a little. Ongoing. The crate banged once, hard. I exhaled, long and slow, and looked back at her. So, I said, just to be clear. You looked at me. I bought you coffee. And now I'm, what? Adopted? Her expression softened in a way that made my chest do something inconvenient. In a sense, she said. Yes. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Because if there's one thing humans are good at, it's laughing right before everything changes. Well, I said, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. I guess I should ask your name. She paused. Soon, she said. First, you should know this. She leaned in, just enough that the air between us felt charged. My people will hear of this. And they will be very curious. About what? Why a human, she said softly, would accept so much responsibility for a stranger. I glanced at the coffee, now cooling between us. Honestly? I said. I thought you could use one. Her smile, this time, was unmistakably real. And somewhere across the galaxy, humanity's reputation quietly took a sharp, irreversible turn. I learned 3 important things in the next 5 minutes. First, guardianship was not marriage, but socially, legally, financially, and politically it was apparently close enough that most species didn't bother distinguishing between the two. Second, the woman sitting across from me was not just some traveler with intense eye contact. She carried a name that made bureaucrats stand straighter and traders suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Third, the crate under the table exploded open. Not literally. No fire. No shrapnel. Just a sudden mechanical release followed by 80 pounds of muscle, scales, and enthusiasm launching directly at my chest. I reacted with the grace of a falling vending machine. The creature landed on me, claws hooked into my jacket, long tail whipping across 2 empty chairs. Up close, it smelled faintly like ozone and pepper. Its glowing eyes studied me. Then it licked my face. The diner collectively inhaled. Well, I croaked from beneath it. Either I passed the test or I'm being tenderized. The woman watched calmly, hands folded around her cup. He approves, she said. Fantastic, I wheezed. What is it? A bata lizard. Of course it is. The creature made a rumbling sound that vibrated through my ribs. Not a growl. More like a purr, if purring could dissolve bone. It has never bonded this quickly, she added, and there was something almost impressed in her voice. I carefully pushed myself upright, the lizard refusing to move. Its head settled onto my shoulder like we were old friends reunited after a long war. I'm naming him Pickles, I said. She blinked. Pickles? Non-threatening name. Psychological strategy. If you ever have to shout it in public, people assume it's harmless. Pickles flicked his tongue across my ear. A nearby patron fainted. My tablet chimed again, and I reluctantly looked down. Dependent creature registered. Care standards uploaded. Warning: diet includes raw protein. I don't want to know what that means, I muttered. You will acclimate, she said gently. Acclimate is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. She studied me for a moment, then extended her hand. My name is Lyris Vale, she said. Of the 9th inheritor line. The server dropped an entire tray behind me. I tried to pretend that meant nothing to me. It mostly worked, because it actually meant nothing to me. Mark Reyes, I replied. Of the extremely replaceable cargo pilots. Her lips curved slightly. You diminish yourself. An individual who accepts selection without hesitation is not replaceable. Oh, there was hesitation, I said. It just arrived late. A slim projection appeared above the table, my tablet syncing with hers. Numbers began populating the air. I squinted. Then leaned closer. Then wished I hadn't. That can't be a debt, I said slowly. That's a planetary budget. It is complicated, she admitted. You owe enough money to buy several moons. They were strategic loans. For what? A period of political displacement. I stared at her. You were exiled? Temporarily repositioned. That's just exile with better branding. She didn't argue. Pickles sneezed. Something behind us corroded. I rubbed my face. Okay. New question. Why you? Why not pick someone rich? Or trained? Or emotionally stable? Her gaze held mine again, that same steady intensity, but warmer now. Because humans are rumored to do something rare. What's that? Stand beside those who have nothing left to offer them. The joke I'd been about to make evaporated. Before I could respond, a shadow fell across our table. Tall. Immaculate. Expensively dangerous. The newcomer's clothing shimmered with embedded circuitry, the kind that cost more than my ship. Their smile never reached their eyes. Lyris, they said smoothly. You move quickly. Her posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Cousin. Ah. Family. The universe's favorite source of problems. Their gaze slid to me, lingering like they were assessing property. This is the human? They asked. I'm sitting right here, I said. They ignored me and placed a small credit chip on the table. It glowed with an amount that made my stomach flip. Renounce guardianship, they said lightly. You've done quite enough already. I blinked. You're bribing me? I am compensating you for an understandable mistake. Pickles lifted his head and hissed. Good lizard. I looked at Lyris. She wasn't meeting my eyes. Is that allowed? I asked her quietly. Yes, she said. Guardianship may be transferred, if the guardian agrees. The cousin's smile widened a fraction. I should have thought about it. Any sensible person would have. Take the money. Untangle myself from aristocratic debt and assassination-adjacent relatives. Go back to hauling cargo and complaining about engine noises. Instead, I heard myself say, No. The word hung there. The cousin tilted their head. No? No, I repeated. I bought the coffee. I guess I'm committed now. Lyris looked at me then, really looked, composure cracking just enough to reveal surprise. Humans, the cousin murmured, almost amused. Famously impulsive. Sometimes, I agreed. But mostly we just don't like bullies. The smile vanished. This is not a conflict you comprehend, they said quietly. Probably not, I admitted. But she looked like she needed someone on her side. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the cousin gave a soft, humorless laugh. You have no idea how dangerous noble disputes become, they said, and turned away. As they disappeared into the crowd, I realized my pulse was hammering. Lyris exhaled slowly. Why? She asked. Why what? Why refuse? That some would alter your life. I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. My life was already altered when your dinosaur adopted me. Pickles made a pleased rumble. She leaned closer, voice softer now. You risk yourself for a stranger. I thought about that. Then shook my head. You stopped being a stranger when you sat down and shared a coffee. Something changed in her expression then, something lighter, almost fragile. You are very human, Mark Reyes. Yeah, I said. It's a chronic condition. For the first time since this chaos began, she laughed. Not politely. Not carefully. Just pure, surprised laughter that made several nearby patrons stare. And I had the strange, unmistakable feeling that buying that coffee might turn out to be the smartest reckless decision I'd ever made. The next morning, the spaceport diner was quieter than usual, which was ironic, because my life had just become infinitely louder. Pickles had claimed the booth as his new territory, tail flicking in judgment whenever I tried to sit down. Lyris sipped her coffee with a serene patience that humans rarely understand, but I was beginning to notice that patience was a thing humans didn't necessarily need to teach themselves. It was something that emerged when faced with beings who could eat you in one bite if they were offended. I, on the other hand, had zero patience for half of what this galaxy considered normal. That, apparently, was exactly why she tolerated me. Then came the first real test. The diner's gravity grid flickered. 1 second we were sipping quietly. The next, trays and cups were floating midair, silverware twirling in a delicate orbit around me. A shadow moved across the ceiling tiles, something sleek and fast. I didn't need to analyze it, instinct kicked in. Humans aren't fast in theory, but we are fast in survive now, figure it out later. I grabbed the nearest utensil, a heavy metal spoon, and swung it with reckless abandon. Pickles leapt at the shadow, claws extended, making a satisfying thunk as it latched onto the intruder. My reflexes and the lizard's fury combined in a chaotic ballet. Cups fell. Steam hissed. Gravity snapped back mid-fight, sending the intruder tumbling into a stack of napkin dispensers. By the time security arrived, I was standing on one chair, spoon raised like a ceremonial staff, Pickles growling at my side, the would-be assassin pinned by a combination of force and sheer cosmic bad luck. The diner erupted into applause. Or perhaps hysteria. I couldn't tell. Lyris, however, watched quietly, and her expression was the most unnerving part. Calm, composed, but I could see the faintest glimmer of something almost like admiration. You have a talent for chaos, she said softly when the room had settled. I call it improvisation, I said. Humans excel at winging it. Humans are unpredictable, she replied. And yet you act without fear. Which was funny, because I was terrified. But fear and action don't always align. Somehow, they rarely do for humans. We returned to the table, and I noticed that the tablet on my wrist had updated again. New notifications, new responsibilities, new everything. Lyris leaned in, eyes still calm, studying me as if weighing the invisible balance of my worth. I chose you deliberately, she said quietly. I choked on my coffee. Literally. Excuse me? For guardianship, she clarified. Not by accident. Your species is rumored to bond fiercely and protect those who cannot defend themselves. That intrigued me. Well, I said, still coughing a little. That seems like a lot of pressure for one coffee. She didn't laugh. Not yet. She simply regarded me with a patience that was almost impossible to meet. But the energy in her gaze suggested warmth, not threat. And then the second test arrived. Her cousin, the elegant, predatory type, appeared in the diner again, this time with more deliberate intent. Their eyes were sharp, their clothes shimmered with more wealth than most planets could comprehend, and the smile was polite but deadly. You are the human? They asked, voice dripping with skepticism. I'm sitting right here, I said, because apparently I was not going to pretend to be invisible anymore. You accepted guardianship. the cousin said. Without legal counsel. I shrugged. It seemed efficient. Lyris glanced at me, eyebrows slightly raised. You are very human, she said. I consider that a compliment, I replied. The cousin leaned in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. You do not understand what you are entangled in. Noble disputes can ruin lives. Try me, I said. I grew up around cargo manifests and faulty gravity drives. I can handle paperwork and peril in equal measure. Pickles hissed slightly, as if to underscore my point. The cousin departed, leaving an air of tension behind. Lyris looked at me again, voice softer now. Why did you refuse? I leaned back, hands spread wide in surrender. Because I didn't want someone else deciding for you. You needed me on your side. She paused, her lips pressing together as if to suppress an emotion. Then she looked away, just briefly, before meeting my eyes again. The faintest crack in her composure revealed surprise, maybe even admiration. We spent the next hour in an odd quiet, punctuated only by Pickle's shifting weight and the occasional chiming of the tablet. I noticed something remarkable. She was studying human humor like a scientist, tilting her head at jokes, noting sarcasm, testing my patience with an almost scholarly curiosity. And I, for my part, found myself teaching her subtlety in conversation, teasing her gently, and feeling that strange flutter in my chest that humans call attraction. It was interrupted, naturally, by politics. Another noble claimant arrived, sleek, dangerous, and dripping wealth. They presented a challenge: renounce guardianship or face consequences. I could have taken the money, walked away, returned to hauling cargo, fixing ships, and pretending the universe wasn't laughing at me. But something in Lyris' gaze, steady and bright, told me that this wasn't about money. It was about trust. About courage. About standing for something, even if your species considered you a walking disaster waiting to happen. No, I said. The word left my mouth with more conviction than I expected. I'm not renouncing anything. Her eyes widened. That small flicker of shock, it was human enough for me to notice. Why? She asked. Because you looked like you needed someone on your side, I said, smiling, and trying not to flinch at how serious it sounded. Pickles gave a low, pleased rumble. Somewhere in the diner, someone whispered about the audacity of humans. I grinned. Humans were audacious. It was basically a core feature. For the first time, Lyris laughed, a sound that seemed to diffuse the tension in the room, soft and surprised. She leaned back, gaze locking with mine again, and I realized that absurdity, courage, and human impulsiveness had just created something remarkable. And I had no idea just how far this was going to go. But for now, it was enough to survive the chaos, charm an alien aristocrat, and hold the gaze of someone who could have eaten me, figuratively, at least. Because when you're human, sometimes that's all you need, to decide, in the middle of absurdity, that you're going to stand, even when everything else says you shouldn't. And sometimes, that's exactly how love begins. The hearing was scheduled for mid-morning, but of course, nothing in this galaxy happened on time. I found myself pacing in the ornate waiting chamber, Pickles sprawled across my boots, eyes half-lidded in judgment. Lyris sat across from me, serene as ever, though I could see her fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. She wasn't impatient, exactly, but the quiet tension was impossible to ignore. I had spent the night thinking, as humans are prone to do when reality bites harder than expected, about what it meant to be a guardian, and what it meant to be chosen. This wasn't like Earth. This wasn't a casual friendship, a handshake, or even a contract you could ignore if the terms seemed unfair. Guardianship was total. Life-altering. Dangerous in ways I hadn't yet fully comprehended. And yet, somehow, I felt ready. She glanced at me, eyes catching the light in a way that made me think she might actually be assessing whether I was human enough to survive this court. I swallowed. Humans act brave when confronted with the absurd, but internally, we're often a mess of panic and hope. That combination apparently works surprisingly well across species. The court chamber was imposing. Towers of glass, floating data streams, ceremonial holograms projecting laws that predated several known star systems. Lawyers, nobles, and scribes circled, murmuring in alien dialects that occasionally overlapped with sounds that might have been music. Somewhere overhead, a council drone hummed with authority. And at the center, a judge whose reputation alone could topple entire families, watched me with a detached, calculating gaze. I stepped forward. Pickles trotted beside me, tail swishing, and I could swear the judge flinched slightly. There is nothing more disarming than a human walking into a galactic court with a prehistoric reptile casually leaning against their leg. I took a deep breath and did what humans do best. I spoke without consulting a manual, without waiting for consensus, without carefully measuring every word against millennia of legal precedent. I'm here because, I began, glancing at Lyris to make sure I wasn't about to make a catastrophic mistake. I chose to be here. Not because of contracts, debts, or obligations. Not because of politics or inheritance. I am here because someone gave me their trust, and I intend to honor it. The chamber fell into a silence so complete it felt like space itself had paused. Lyris' gaze softened, and for the first time, she allowed a faint smile to break through her composed exterior. Pickles yawned, tail lashing lazily, and somehow that added to the human charm factor. I continued, I don't know all your laws. I don't know every clause or statute or ritual. But I do know this: when a person chooses another, when a species trusts a human to stand beside them, we stand. We don't calculate risk, we don't weigh consequences. We act. And in this case, I act because it matters. Because she matters. There was a murmur from the council. Not anger. Not approval. Just curiosity. I had no idea if I was winning or losing, but humans tend to have this effect. Something about sincerity, reckless but unwavering, confounds even the most rigid systems. Lyris leaned closer to me, voice barely audible. You really mean that? I do, I said. Every word. And if that's a mistake, well, humans are good at surviving mistakes. The judge cleared their throat, a sound like a storm contained in crystal. The human's argument is unconventional. I smiled. Thank you. Unconventional works for humans. Something remarkable happened then. Lyris' fingers brushed against mine, accidental, intentional, I couldn't tell, and it felt like confirmation, grounding, warmth in a place built entirely of cold law and expectations. Her eyes, those luminous eyes that had started this whole chaos with a look, held mine, and I realized that choice, real choice, had just entered the picture. After deliberation that felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the verdict came. Guardianship was confirmed, provisional rights upgraded to permanent status, and I was officially part of her world, fully, irreversibly. There was a brief moment of celebration. Pickles jumped onto the table, knocking over a ceremonial chalice, and I laughed. Lyris laughed too, genuine and unrestrained, and somehow it was contagious. The court, which had moments ago been a bastion of rigid authority, seemed to relax, even if just slightly. Later, as we left the chamber, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Lyris looked at me, and for once, she didn't study me as a human, or a guardian, or a curiosity. She looked at me as an equal, a choice, a partner. You could have walked away, she said softly. I know, I replied. But humans don't do that. Not when someone matters. Not when someone trusts us. Her smile widened. You really are dangerously human. I shrugged. It comes with perks. And disadvantages. Mostly perks. Pickles nudged my leg, apparently agreeing, and I patted his scaled head. Lyris tilted her head, laughing at our little domestic display in the middle of a galaxy that would never understand human impulses. That night, aboard the shuttle taking us back to her estate, I watched stars streak past in streaks of light and color. Lyris sat quietly beside me, her hand brushing mine every now and then, and I realized that the absurdity, the danger, the debt, the creatures, the laws, none of it mattered as much as this moment. The universe might be chaotic, incomprehensible, and dangerous, but humans have a way of cutting through the nonsense with simple decisions. I looked at her, and she gave me that look again, the one that had started everything. And I did what any human would. I smiled, reached for her hand, and held it tight. Somewhere across the galaxy, I suspected, humanity's reputation shifted once again. We were bold, reckless, unpredictable, and apparently irresistible. And in that moment, I understood that no law, no contract, no political threat, not even a battle lizard with a taste for destruction, could change one simple fact: humans act when something matters. And when it comes to love, trust, and choice, humans never hesitate. Pickles purred. Lyris laughed. And I, entirely and irrevocably human, decided that whatever chaos awaited next, I would face it with them by my side. Because sometimes, making a choice, a bold, reckless, human choice, is all that really matters.